All right, this will be the examples video for chapter 6. So perhaps let's go through maybe some of these problems in the back of the chapter that'll be on the to-do list. So I think one of them that's going to end up being on the to-do list is this one here, chapter problem number 2, which is a good problem. And so this problem asks us, which of the following are included in GDP and which are not? All right. So we have the cost of hospital stays, the rise in life expectancy over time, childcare provided by a licensed daycare center, childcare provided by a grandmother, a used car sale, a new car sale, the greater variety of cheese available in supermarkets, the iron that goes into the steel that goes into a refrigerator bought by a customer. All right, so a lot to work with here. So we just have to remember, how do you solve problems like this? All right, so it's asking us what's included in GDP, so we have to remember what the definition of GDP is. All right, so GDP again is the total market value of all goods and services produced or provided in a country during a given period of time. So the cost of a hospital stay or the cost of hospital stays, presuming that is a service that somebody paid for because they were sick, that's a service, and that would be counted towards GDP. All right. Now, the rise in life expectancy over time, that is, that's going to be something that you can't really buy in the marketplace, or someone can't produce the rise in life expectancy. So this is just a characteristic of an economy that's growing, is typically you see life expectancy rise, but that's not going to be included in GDP. Childcare provided by a licensed daycare center. That sounds to me like a service that somebody is purchasing by a licensed daycare center that's providing that service. That will count towards GDP. Childcare provided by a grandmother, that's one of those activities that is not taking place in a marketplace. And so that is not counted towards GDP. A used car sale does not count. Why does it not count? Because again, when the car was brand new and sold, it counted towards GDP the year that it was produced. So if it's a 2010 Honda, that car counted towards the GDP in 2010. If the car was sold now in 2025, it's not going to count towards 2025 GDP because it was already counted. So they have to be brand new final goods. All right, so used car does not count. A new car sale, that does count. The greater variety of cheese available in supermarkets. So that's a nice characteristic to have. I mean, who doesn't love cheese? But that doesn't count towards GDP because that's not something that is, this description of a variety is not a good or service that's bought or sold. It's just a consequence of having a lot of cheese on the market. Now the cheese itself, that would count towards GDP, all right? But having greater variety, while valuable, is not something that counts towards GDP. Part H should hopefully be obvious. The iron that goes into the steel that goes into a refrigerator, which is finally bought by a consumer. The iron is an intermediate good. It does not count. Why? Because presumably when this consumer purchases the refrigerator, they're also purchasing all the intermediate goods that went into creating that refrigerator, plus a little bit more for putting all those intermediate goods together to create a refrigerator. So if we were to count the iron and the refrigerator, we would be inevitably double counting. All right. Let's take a look at a couple of others maybe. Let's see here. So this is an interesting question. This would be number 8. It says, is it possible for GDP to rise while at the same time per capita GDP is falling? Is it possible for GDP to fall while per capita GDP is rising? So it sounds a little perplexing, but let's work on it. All right, so let's again remember what GDP per capita is. So GDP per capita is GDP divided by the population. Let's just abbreviate that with POP, P-O-P. So the question says, is it possible for GDP to rise while at the same time per capita GDP is falling? So how do we get that to happen? Well, the only way we can get the left-hand side to fall while the denominator is rising is if this value here is rising by a greater amount than GDP. So this can happen if the population is growing more rapidly than GDP. So presumably the denominator over time gets bigger, and then if you're dividing by something that's bigger, that's going to make the ratio fall. And is it possible for GDP to fall while per capita GDP is rising? Let's see. Is it possible for per capita? Let's see. Is it possible for GDP to fall? So let me do this in a different color now. So is this possible while per capita GDP is rising, while this is happening? So for both of these to fall, let's see, it would mean that the opposite case, essentially. So this would be that GDP is falling, but the population is falling at a lower rate than GDP is. So then again, you would be dividing by a smaller number, and then overall you would get an increase in this ratio. All right, that's the only way you're going to get that to happen. Interesting question. All right, so let's take a look at the next one. The Central African Republic has a GDP of 1,107,689 CFA francs and a population of 4.862 million. The exchange rate is 284.681 CFA francs per dollar. Calculate the GDP per capita in the Central African Republic. All right, it's a lot there. Let's write down the information that we're given. So we are given that GDP is equal to 1,107,689 million. CFA francs. So I'll just use a capital F for that. And the population is 4.862 million. The exchange rate is 284.681 francs per dollar. So F over $1. So $1.00. Calculate the GDP per capita of the Central African Republic. Well, we don't really need the exchange rate to do that. So GDP per capita is going to be equal to 1,107,689 million francs, and the population is 4.862 million. All right. Well, then the millions cancel, and we're left with our GDP per capita, whatever this value is. We can leave it as such. We don't need final answers. We just need to write the formula with the right values in. right? And again, this is in francs now. Now, if we wanted to express this in dollars, we have to write the exchange rate in a way where the francs cancel and we end up with dollars. So if we wanted to do this in US dollars, that's pretty easy. So in US dollars, we get 1,107,689 franc divided by 4.862, right? Multiplied by, and we need to write this exchange rate in a way where the francs cancel and we're left with dollars. So if I just write this the way it is, I'm going to get F squared. All right, so I got to flip this. So it's going to be 1.00 dollars divided by 284.681 franc. And then the francs cancel, and we get what we need. And that's our answer right there. If we want to write it out as a final form, we could do that as 1,107,689 dollars divided by 4.862 times 284.681. All right. So as you can tell, I don't like using calculators. You don't need a calculator, and actually, I am going to require you to do your work like this, simply because what I'm concerned with is how you're using these identities. I don't care how good you can type values into a calculator. What I'd like is final numbers, where if I were to take this into a calculator, I could get my final answer. But I'm more interested in the steps that you take to get these here. All right. Let's do a couple more that I don't want to do the entire to-do list for you, but let me see if I can find a couple of more, at least one more problem to do. This one might be pretty good here. So last year, a small nation with abundant forests cut down $200 worth of trees. It turned $100 worth of those trees into $150 worth of lumber. It used $100 worth of lumber, to produce $250 worth of bookshelves. Assuming the country produces nothing else, and there are no other inputs used in producing trees, lumber, and bookshelves, what is this nation's GDP? In other words, what is the value of the final goods the nation produced, including trees, lumber, and bookshelves? Wow, that's a good problem. So this one is going to definitely highlight how we're going to try and avoid double counting, right? So let's maybe write down some of the required information we need. This is probably like reminding you all of your SATs. It sounds like an SAT question. All right, so we've got the nation cut down, so it cut down $200 worth of trees. All right. So then $100 of that went towards making lumber. So we have two things that happened to this. So $100 went towards making lumber. And the other $100 just became trees. All right. So what's the intermediate good and what's the final good here? So this is the final good. And this is the intermediate good that we're not going to count. All right. So let's do that with the next step then. So then $150 worth of lumber, what did we do here? It took $100 of it to produce $250. So this took, let's see, it took $100 to produce $250 worth of bookshelves. All right. So again, we have to ask ourselves, what is the so what's left over after this? What's left over is the $50 in lumber. Okay. So that is also a final good because the $100 went into making $250 worth of bookshelves. Okay. So what do we have here then? All right. Well, we're going to have let's see. We have the $250 worth of bookshelves is a final good. And then we also have these components of the intermediate goods that went into GDP because they weren't used as into the production of the final goods. All right. So when we add this all up together, what we end up with is we have 100 plus 250 is 350 plus $50. That's going to be $400. If we assume that there is no other outputs, there are no other inputs used in producing trees, lumber, and bookshelves. All right. So that's it. $100 worth of trees, $50 worth of lumber, and $250 worth of bookshelves. That's what counts towards GDP, which is $400. All right. Okay. That should get you all started pretty well on the chapter. Let me just make sure there's nothing else that we should go over real quick. So again, don't forget your definitions. That's important. Let's see here. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll post this, and we'll see you on the next video. Take care.